Hello and welcome, fellow bookish people, to our Instant Book Club weekly discussion. This week, we read The Masque of the Red Death by Edgar Allan Poe, so now it's time to chat about our thoughts. In the future, I'd love for these videos to be live so we can have a real time discussion, but for now, I'm going to give you my thoughts, and I encourage you to give me yours in the comments to this video. So, without any further ado, let's dig in. So, initial impressions The Masque of the Red Death is a story that I read for the first time many years ago when I was still in school. And for whatever reason, I feel called to read it again and again and again, usually with a couple of years of separation. Um, it's a story that's very different from the typical structure that we see in a lot of short stories. It's not rooted in any one character. We have sort of an omnipotent narrator who kind of floats through this vignette, giving it a very dreamy fairy tale like quality to the story. Um, we really only have two characters, which is not uncommon in short stories, but we don't really get a point of view from either one of them. Those two characters being Prince Prospero and then, of course, the Red Death itself. So it's a structure that I like for this topic. I don't know that it would work very well for many other kinds of short stories or more traditional stories um, because of kind of the detachment that comes with the style. And I have to wonder if that had to do with something of the grief that the author was going through when he wrote this. Um, Poe, for those of you who don't know, lost his wife to tuberculosis, which is a pretty um, it's a pretty terrible way to die. A lot of fluid in the lungs, a lot of blood being coughed up. Not fun, not good times for anybody. And uh, unfortunately, is actually something that's still happening in the world today, even though it's entirely curable. So, plug for fixing diseases that we actually have the cure for. But anyway, his wife died of tuberculosis, and he wrote this story shortly thereafter. And by all accounts, he was just absolutely crushed by her loss. And so I wonder, I wonder if that grief kind of left him with sort of that disconnection. Sometimes when you're feeling an overwhelming thing, you have kind of an out of body feeling, especially with things like grief or depression, um, where you feel almost disconnected from yourself. And so I have to wonder if he wrote this in such a dreamy way to mirror that feeling of disembodiment. If he did, it's a great structural device within this story. Um, when we get into some of the more traditional elements here, again, it's not a traditional kind of story where we have two characters, neither of which we get to know very well, other than a few, you know, choice words that are tossed out about Prince Prospero. Him being happy and dauntless and sagacious. Um, we see him essentially sort of recoiling, or I should say, constricting away from the world, which tells you something about his selfishness in this. That he's a prince of this land, and yet he has this remark about you know the world could take care of itself for a little while. So he takes all of his friends and he walls them all off into this abbey, and they spend their months having lavish party after lavish party while the rest of the world dies outside, thinking that they've saved themselves, sort of laughing in the face of this uh, inevitable demise. Um, and even though the Red Death kills anyone, I would almost say that Prince Prospero is kind of our villain of this story in some ways, depending on how you read it. The Red Death is more of an inevitable force of nature, simply kind of carrying out its duty. And if we treat it as a character, it's one of those negative protagonists that, even though ultimately what they do is objectionable. Um, it's done so well that you almost have to respect it. Um, it's an intriguing way to look at this um, in terms of th- this character. Because there's not much to like about Prince Prospero. He's certainly not a heroic figure in this story. Um, and there's no sense of tragedy at his loss, more tragedy at the idea that uh, so many people believe that they could circumvent the inevitability. And again, I have to wonder if that comes back to the grieving process for Poe. This feeling of there is nothing that can be done, and how silly of it, so how silly he was to think that perhaps he could save his wife with doctors and medication and what have you. Um, yeah, I find that curious. Um, the writing style, as with a lot of Poe stuff, is very ornate. A time period, we might call that purple prose now, where it's kind of overly flowery, very descriptive. You get a lot of $10 words, shall we say, throughout this, and but again, that kind of feeds to that kind of fairy tale element here. We're truly not much actually happens in terms of action in the story. Um, it's a lot of sort of summarizing events, laying out a few things that are happening, and then describing everything in dripping detail so that you're almost suffocated by the cloister that the story takes place in. Um, the setting itself is an interesting mood. Um, that kind of colored rainbow motif of the seven rooms and the seven colors, um, none of which is intentionally red, which makes sense considering societally they're dealing with the Red Death. Red probably being a uncomfortable color with uncomfortable associations at the time. Um, but that emphasis on the death sort of walking the arc of the whole rainbow from start to finish before uh, you know blanketing the entire abbey with the death of everyone else is a uh, is an interesting act of symbolism, like a sense of completeness, like the beginning and finishing of an arc, the completion of one's time on Earth, kind of thing. Um, the color also adds a certain atmosphere. It juxtaposes the gaiety of the first six rooms against the last room, the black room with the red pane. Um, and then, of course, there's that clock, that dolorous clock that just sends chills up everybody's spine and is like it's like a guillotine to the festivities, cutting them off for a moment before they're almost cold started back into action with people forcing this sense of festivity and joy as a ward against this death that's ultimately unsuccessful. But so juxtaposing all of that bright color and enthusiasm against this one little black hole of a room with its one scythe of a clock, I think really helps build the atmosphere in the story and keep it from being just kind of a slog of narrative summary. Um, it's really a story of feeling without a lot of action. The pacing is, I think, the pacing is the key to success in this story here. Um, it's 4 pages or so. Um, I guess, well, One, two, three, four, five, six, seven. Okay, yeah, 7 pages. So it's still not terribly long, um, but it it summarizes sort of um, the historic events very quickly. We get through the state of the world in 2 paragraphs, and then the rest of the story is describing in intricate detail just this one night as we slowly wind our way through. You get this feeling of all of life coming by is a rush, and then now the minutes, the seconds are creaking by, which adds so much more emphasis. So it builds so much more tension in the story. Um, this this question of, will these cloistered people survive or will they die? Is it inevitable that they should be conquered by the Red Death, or should they be able to overcome it, and stand perhaps above it? Um, we get the sense that that's not going to happen, considering the amount of um, hubris, shall we say, that they exhibit, the crowd, the prince in particular, personification of nobility and excess here, um, exhibits in his arrogance, to think that he can simply shut out this force of nature. Um, but still, that question, it it gnaws at you at this pace. I think it'd be very easy, in a story like this, by a less skilled author, to simply rush through the details, to sort of get all the description out in a couple paragraphs of, this is the time, this is the place, and then spend a whole lot of time uh, having sort of stock characters have conversations about the state of the world, and their concerns about the situation, and proselytizing on the virtues of what they're doing, or you know how people who aren't as noble or as well off as they should have to fend for themselves. Um, and I think that would make it a weaker story. I think that it wouldn't burrow into you in the same way if he sort of picked it apart instead of just letting you feel every floorboard, every velvet cushion, every shift of the light, every peal of the bell. Um, the pacing here makes the story, I think, and it's only accomplished by his very deliberate step by step movement through the events of a single evening. There's no real, well, I take that back. I was going to say there's no real character development here, but there is character development here. There's development of the character of Prince Prospero, who, again, as I said, goes from this sort of audacious individual uh, who quite literally is, cloistering himself off from the world, and sort of thumbing his nose, if you will, at nature itself, and then coming to the end of this story where he tries to kill the Red Death. He tries to kill the personification of mortality, and of course can't. Falls dead himself. We see this arc of growing arrogance that's finally cut off at the knees and comes crashing down. And so it's um, sort of a fallen arc for this character here, where we see him capsized in a very few words, uh, by his own fatal flaw. And that's really all the prince is in this, in many ways. He's boiled down to a single fatal flaw. Um, I'd say he's flat. I mean, the Red Death is too, in a lot of ways, in our how we might view characters in other forms of Gothic horror. That again, for the space here, they really just serve a purpose. Can we get back to that fairy tale element here where the characters in the story are not so much people as they are ideas? Um, so yeah, again, I think it works here. I don't think it would work in a lot of other places. I think that if the story was written less dreamily, um, the characters would really ring tinny to the ear. Whereas here, they feel like integral parts of this lavish, doomed universe. The conflict revolution, we've already kind of talked about the resolution here of this, these themes of inevitability, of not being able to shut yourself out from, well, from the power of nature, that man is ultimately insignificant compared to the whims of the world. Um, and so we see this instance of Prince Prospero and his courtiers, trying to trying to outfox Mother Nature herself, trying to outfox this disease, and ultimately being pitifully unsuccessful at this. There's a lot of elements here that are, um, that we see in a lot of other Poe's works, and we'll read more Edgar Allan Poe on this channel, and so we'll talk about that some more then. But uh, it's an element of horror that I think makes Poe and Lovecraft um, and many of the other classic Gothic writers so successful, is this sense of inevitability, this growing sense of characters who are treading water as as fast as they can just to keep their heads above, but are doomed to sink down into the depths. Um, and so we're not disappointed when they do. And then in other stories, besides this one, we get so excited when it turns out that they actually do manage to drag themselves from the darkness. Um, I think it's what makes Gothic horror, and a lot of different varieties of horror, subgenres of horror, so intriguing, and so powerful. It's that fight against the inevitable. Anyway, yeah, The Mask of the Red Death. It's short, but it's a fun one to start off with. And I look very much forward to reading some more Edgar Allan Poe with you all. Next week, we're going to be reading a different story by a different author. I was about to give away spoilers there, but I guess we'll announce that tomorrow. So no spoilers here. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me for uh, today's instant book club discussion of The Mask of the Red Death. And I'll see you next week. Do you like dark fantasy fiction? If you do, check out my Kindle Vella series, The Tyranny of Fate. It's heavily inspired by D&D, the Cthulhu mythos, epic adventures like the Stormlight Archive, Edgar Allan Poe's gothic horror, noir mysteries like Sin City and the Maltese Falcon. It follows former soldier and fugitive Okimata Ramsey. Haunted by a betrayal he knows he'd commit again, Okimata wants nothing more than to escape his past. But when bounty hunters show up to collect his reward, he's forced to throw his lot in with a divination cult bound for the far west. It's a choice that has repercussions that span all of existence. Check it out now on Kindle Vella. New episodes drop every Saturday, and you can read the first 3 episodes for free.